Welcome to Masters of Product Management, a show that gives you real-world techniques and cutting-edge strategies to learn, apply, and succeed in product management. Now, here's the master himself, Stephen Haines.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Today, I want to talk about product roadmaps. Now, if I were standing up in front of a room of product managers and asked the question, how many people have to prepare a product roadmap? Everybody, of course, would raise their hand. And if I asked them to pull a visualization of what that roadmap looks like, I'd get probably as many different variations as there would be people in the audience, which is probably not surprising. And then if I asked the question, well, how many people are using roadmaps for specific purposes? For instance, to share information with engineers, or to share information with customers, or to share information with your bosses because it's due. You know, throughout my product management career, the bosses always wanted to know what the heck was on the roadmap. The sales guys did, and everybody else did. You know, the thing to me was that it always seemed like a big rush exercise. And from my point of view, and even my work with clients now, I felt, or I do feel, that these roadmaps are not necessarily rooted in sufficient reality, some of them not even linked to the strategy. The other part that gets on my nerves sometimes, not to be so crude about it, is that we don't look back, we don't audit to see how accurate the work that we did was related to the results that we achieved. I have an interesting short story. I was working with in a former corporate job at AT&T, and a sales team working in Malaysia once got a hold of a roadmap. It wasn't official, it wasn't published, it was on some kind of an internal system, but they included it as part of a big tender for one of these big telephone company deals, and we won the deal, and we didn't have a product. Imagine that. I don't know if anybody's ever had that problem. So that was a huge problem. And I got to believe that there are other outcomes that are probably negative, but maybe some very positive. I still think there's got to be a better way. So today, what I want to do is talk about the effective use of roadmaps with my esteemed colleague, Mark Lamps. Mark Lamps is Vice President of Technology and Product Management at Pentair, and he's been there for about 21 years. And currently he's leading a technology and product management group. But he's also finished leading an integration of a $1.8 billion merger with Erico. Mark's been deeply involved in product management leadership for close to 2 decades, and I know he plays a lot of basketball. So Mark, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Stephen.
I do believe that there's a problem in terms of implementing effective roadmaps and perhaps even a process. I wanted to get your take on it. What are you seeing?
When I took my current role, we lacked a standard process. And one of my core beliefs is that by getting to a standard process and then continuously improving that standard process, you can start to achieve best practice. Mm-hmm. The opportunity to acquire the Erico company really brought this to the forefront and has in a number of areas really encouraged us to really choose what our standard processes and standard work are, and then apply that not only to a new acquisition, but to all of our legacy businesses as well. As we've done this with product roadmaps, and I'll add in product strategies to this scope because they're so closely linked, we definitely discovered that all parts of our business were either doing them differently or not doing them at all. And so we have really worked to create a template, a standardized template for our product strategies, and we've trained all of our product managers on that template. So it really guides them to some of the core thinking that they need to do. Mm-hmm. And then the culmination of that product strategy really does, we have that resulting in a product roadmap, which can then be reviewed by a cross-functional team. Mm-hmm. As you mentioned, Stephen, can be shared with engineering and can be shared with at least sales leadership. We tend not to share it with the entire sales force at this point, just because we do want to be extremely cautious about overpromising and also tipping our hat to the competition when we don't want to. But we do share it with kind of the top 2 levels of sales leadership so they know what's coming.
You're listening to Masters of Product Management with Stephen Haines on the Sequent Business Network. sequentbusiness.net.
You know, a lot of leaders would be envious of the position that you have. I really have to tell you, because many of them seem frustrated sometimes. And I think, and this is, I don't even have to think this. Based on my own research, there are distinct disconnects between the strategy at the portfolio and the product line level and the roadmaps themselves. And so it is a really great feat that you've basically achieved this. But how do you get cross-functional and cross-organizational participation in a company like Pentair that's large, complex, and global?
A couple things, and speaking candidly, this is a challenge. There are definitely plenty of reviews we hold where all the right people are not in the room, and then a few weeks later we get criticism or other negative feedback because the person was not in the room. Nonetheless, the first thing we do is really try and make sure that the business unit leader is present and fully engaged. Once the business unit leader is present, amazingly, everyone else seems to arrive as well. Kind of a shadow of a leader concept.
Sure.
The second thing is we try to make the reviews meaningful. I mentioned that we have a standard template, but certainly that template doesn't always apply exactly, and every slide in that template certainly doesn't apply equally to the specific product line being reviewed. And so we really endeavor, and I coach the teams pretty intently on this, that if there's no conclusion to be drawn from a certain slide, skip over it, mark it on the bottom for information only, no conclusion, whatever you want to mark it, so that we can really focus on the pieces of information, the inputs that lead us to key conclusions, and then really draw out those key conclusions specifically and make sure that they link to how the product roadmap ends up looking, link to the value proposition we're trying to drive with the customers.
And hopefully back to the strategy, because I think that's one of the key points.
Definitely back to the strategy, yes.
Yeah. So there are a couple of things that I picked up, even from what you were talking about. Number one, it sounds to me like you and other leaders have a responsibility to coach the product managers so that they can be more effective. And in so doing, they will tend to act more consistently in this both preparation and presentation process. Would that be correct?
Yes. You know, I as a functional leader really view my top role at making sure we do have best practice in place across all the different parts of our business. And as a big part of that role, I do a lot of coaching. I try to make sure that our business unit leaders then don't have to do as much of that coaching and can focus on having good inputs from their product managers that can lead them to make the right decisions for their business.
Do you provide a feedback loop to the other cross-functional leads that you work with to basically, it's almost like giving them the showcase presentation saying, the benefit of us doing these things is as follows, you know, thanks a lot for doing this work. Let's keep going. Do you act as sort of that kind of cheerleader as well?
I have been acting as a cheerleader. I haven't been doing it in a systematic fashion. So your question does make me think, am I doing enough to reinforce the positive behaviors?
Yeah. Well, sometimes it's hard. You can't, you know, you don't make a list of things to do in the day you get up and say, how many, you know, positive behaviors am I going to, take care of? It's sort of like they tend to be spontaneous and situational. But it sounds to me like you're sensitive to that. And people, from my point of view, you know, I even wish that you were a leader in my organization when I was working, because you represent the kinds of things that others might want to emulate, right? Because they really are positive practices. But getting all that work done and getting everybody involved is sort of one set of things. But then there's one more, and that is, how do you know how well you're doing against those plans? Do you have any techniques or suggestions in terms of measuring accuracy and measuring the compliance with those roadmaps?
We don't have a measure of measuring full compliance with our strategy, but in terms of the roadmaps themselves, and in particular, the new product introductions, we assign target dates to all of those.
Mm-hmm.
And then we do track ourselves in terms of on-time delivery to those dates.
Mm-hmm.
We also track ourselves increasingly rigorously to the first year revenue versus our revenue forecast during the launch process. And that is a truly brutal metric because we are ending up all over the map, but it's a metric that shines in a very intense light on the process and on our assumptions, and thus drives a lot of fantastic root cause countermeasure behavior, which leads us to better understand the market and then improve our processes.
And so that links you, again, all the way back to the strategy. Those things filter down to what you're going to invest in. Those are the things that are on the roadmap. And I'm going to make an assumption here that some of those things on the roadmap would require additional or incremental investment. So there's got to be a business case to support some of those things. And then you have to be able to wrap it around to say, am I delivering on the promise of that case? Am I delivering on the promise of the forecast? And then use that again to drive or refine the strategy. Would that be a succinct way of putting it?
Yes. For the preponderance of what's on our product roadmaps, we end up putting them through a stage gate process where there's a very thorough business case.
Okay, that's interesting. If you were going to summarize some tidbit or tidbits for product managers who are listening to this, because this is a really, really important topic, what one or two things would you want to leave with them?
The first thing I would leave is always start with the customer. One of the things we're increasingly driving is what percentage of your time are you spending actually physically with a customer or an end user, both to talk to those people and to observe their behaviors and learn from that. Then the second thing is make sure you do have a structured way of taking those inputs along with everything else and building that product line strategy, converting that into an executable roadmap, and then executing.
That's great. That is really, really great. Thank you, Mark. I really appreciate this.
Well, thanks for having me, Stephen.
So we've been talking to Mark Lamps today, who's brought us some great insights to help product managers be more effective in communicating their vision and strategy through their roadmaps, and also to assure that those roadmaps achieve the level of success that's envisioned. I hope you'll agree and that you'll share this podcast with your colleagues and tune into the Sequent Business Network next time. Thanks for listening.
This has been Masters of Product Management with Stephen Haines, but it doesn't end there. Just visit sequentbusiness.net to gain access to all of our shows, take advantage of free tools and resources, and subscribe. That way you'll never miss an episode. It's all there at sequentbusiness.net. We'll talk to you next time on Masters of Product Management on the Sequent Business Network. Learn, apply, and succeed. Sequentbusiness.net.